Hi, welcome back. Let's take a look at where we are with our first enemy. If I test my game, I have a system set up so that when I get close enough to the enemy will start chasing the player, right? But if the enemy catches the player, nothing really happens. He just kind of keeps pushing into the player. What we're going to do in this video is create a system so that when the enemy and the player are within a close range, the enemy will start attacking the player with an attack animation. And we'll also create a hitbox to test to see if the player is getting hit by the enemy's attack. So let's take a look at how we can do that. We're going to start in the layout. And we're going to click once on our enemy because we have to add some instance variables and some behaviors in order to make that work. Let's start with the instance variables. I'm going to click where it says instance variable. And so far what I have is a life variable, which is the amount of life my enemy has. A Boolean, which is a true-false statement to see if our enemy is invincible, and a Boolean to see if our character is being knocked back. We're going to add a new instance variable that checks to see when our enemy is attacking. So I'm just going to call it attack. And I'm going to turn the type to a Boolean. And click OK. So now we have an instance variable that we can turn on to make our character attack, and we can turn off to make our character stop attacking. That's great. The other thing I want to do is I want to use a behavior that checks to see if my enemy is within a really close range of my character. And we can do that using the line of sight behavior. Now, if I check down in my behaviors, I already have a line of sight behavior, right? I don't want to mess with this one because this is the one that checks to see if my enemy is close enough to the player for it to start chasing the player. I want to leave that alone. But what you can do is you can actually add a second line of sight behavior. If I go down to behaviors, and click on add new behavior, I can add another line of sight. You can add as many different layers of one behavior as you want. So if I double click on that, now I have line of sight, which is where I test to see if my enemy should be chasing my player. And now I have line of sight 2, where I can test to see if my enemy should be attacking the player. Great. Now we do have to adjust some of the options over here on the left panel. For one, the range. The range is really big right now. 10,000 is the default, which is huge. And we probably want to make that number relatively small. Now, everybody's going to have a different number because it just depends on how big your sprites are. But I'm going to say, let's start at 250, which is pretty close, right? Right now I have my range for my line of sight 1 to 500. So if it's within 500 pixels, it's going to chase my enemy. If it's within 250 pixels, it's going to attack my player. Now, the other thing I'm going to change right here is where it says obstacles. I'm going to turn this to custom. And the only reason for that is it's going to prevent some glitches later. And I honestly don't 100% understand why, but let's just make this custom for now. It stops some glitches in the line of sight events that we'll add in just a minute. Okay, now let's go to our event sheet. What we're going to do is we're going to add some new events. Now, we already have a group for our enemy 1, and we have a subgroup for the movement and a subgroup for damage. Let's leave that alone for now. Let's just add events down here, and then we'll organize it at the end. So I'm going to add an event, and I'm going to use my enemy, and I'm going to scroll down to the bottom, about halfway down. You'll see line of sight and line of sight 2. This is the set of line of sight behaviors that we're going to use for the attack. And we're going to check to see if our enemy has line of sight, LOS, to an object. Click on that. And the object we're going to check to see if it's within range is our main character. Good. Click done. So what this is saying is when our enemy is within 250 range of our main character, we can make an action happen. Let's add an action. And the action we're going to create for our enemy 1 is set Boolean attack is true. Good. So if it's close range, within 250 range, it's going to turn the attack variable true. It's going to turn attack to on. Now, the other thing we want to do is we want to make it that if our main character gets far enough away from our enemy, we want to turn attack to false, right? We want to make it stop attacking. So I'm going to add another event. And it's going to start out the same way. I'm going to use enemy 1. I'm going to go down to the second set of line of sight. Line of sight 2 has LOS to object. Click to choose main character. Click done. But if you remember in the previous video, what we can do is we can make this the opposite of. If you right click on it, we can click on invert. What that does is it means now that if our enemy is not within the 250 range, then we can add an action for that. Enemy 1, set Boolean, attack to false. So just with these two events, we've created a system that within 250 pixel range of our main player, our main character, the enemy's attack will be true. And if it's outside that range, the enemy's attack will be false. That's great. But right now we don't have any actual meaning to the attack. Sure, the variable turns on and off, but what we have to do is create an event that says what happens when attack is true. So let's add an event. We're going to go to our enemy, and we're going to scroll down to where it says, is Boolean instance variable set? If you click on that, we're going to check to see if attack is true. Click done. And if attack is happening, then let's add an action. What we're going to do is we're going to add an animation to our enemy that triggers when the attack is true. So let's go over to our layout and let's double click on our sprite. Now this is the animations editor window. Up in the top right, we have the two animations that we have so far, which is just an idle animation and our enemy's movement animation. I have a walking animation. Let's right click and let's add another animation. And we're going to call this one attack. Once you've named it, let's go over here to the left. You see the little folder icon, the load images from files option. Let's click on that. And what we want to do is we want to find the attack animation that we've created for our sprite. I have it in my documents. Yours might be in the same place. Go to your documents. And mine's called Beetle 1 Attack. So find your animation that you've exported from Piskel. Double click it. And now as you can see at the bottom, we have the frames for our enemy's attack. Now you might need to make some adjustments to that animation. The first thing I'd recommend is right-clicking on the name over in the right window and click on Preview. And I'll show you what it looks like. Mine's kind of slow, right? With the number of frames I have, it's playing a little bit slow. So what you can do is make sure that you've clicked on the name of the animation up in the top right window, and we have an option for speed. We can turn that speed up. So find a good speed for yours. I'm going to turn mine up to 12, and then I'm going to test that out. Preview it. That's pretty good, I think. Maybe even a little too fast. I'm going to turn that down. Let's try 10. Good. We can close our animations editor. Cool. Now let's go back to our event sheet. We have the event that says that when enemy 1 is attacking, let's add an action for that. We're going to go to our enemy, and we're going to set the animation. And if I start by typing in a quotation mark, I get the list of my animations. We're going to use the attack animation. And click done. Now let's try it out. It's not going to work. When I get close enough, my enemy just kind of freezes, right? The animation just kind of stalls out and just kind of slides towards my character. The reason for that is because right now we have this system that says that when enemy 1's attack variable is true, then the animation should be attack. But if I go back into my previous events that I've created for my enemy, there's other stuff that tells the character to set the animation to walk anytime that the enemy is moving. These two things are both telling the enemy to have it set to two different animations at the same time, right? If it's moving and the attack variable is true, then is it supposed to be the walk animation? Is it supposed to be the attack animation? Construct doesn't know, it gets confused, and it just kind of breaks. So what we want to do is we want to add something to this condition that says that if the enemy is attacking, then don't worry about this walk animation. So I can do that by adding another condition to this event. If I double click over here on the left kind of tab on my event, I can go to enemy and I can scroll down to is Boolean instance variable set. And again, that option checks to see if a variable is true or if it's false. We're going to use attack and click done. Now this is saying if it's moving and it is attacking, then set the animation to walk, which is actually the opposite of what we want. So if I right click on this, I can click on invert. Now what it says is if it's moving and it's not attacking, then set the animation to walk. But if it's moving and it is attacking, then the walk animation won't trigger. It'll do the attack instead. Looks like it works. but it's still a little weird. I don't like that my enemy still moves while the attack is happening. Like it's still chasing the player even though the attack animation happens, which is making it kind of slide around in a weird way. I think it would be better if while the attack is happening, we turn off the movement. We make it so it stops chasing just for the time when the attack is being performed. And that's a pretty easy fix. If I go back down to here, where it says the enemy is attack, and I set the animation to attack, I can add another action. And for this one, I'm going to go to my enemy, and I'm going to scroll down to the section that has the move to behavior options. So find move to. One of the options for move to is just stop. Stop having it move. I'm going to click on stop. So now, just while it's within the attack range and the attack is happening, it stops the move to. It stops chasing my player. Let's try that. Great. That looks much better. Test it out. If everything's working well, you should have it so that your enemy chases your player. When it gets close enough, it starts attacking. If you get out of attack range, it goes back to chasing your player. Now you can adjust the range of your second line of sight behavior. Right now I have it set so it's like just barely kind of biting at the feet of my main character. I could change that. If I click once on my enemy and go to the line of sight 2, I can change the range to be whatever I want. If your sprites are smaller, you might have to have a smaller range. So for example, if your enemy starts attacking really far away from your main character, try changing the range to be a lower number. I'm going to try 200 and see how that looks. It might be better. Now, if yours isn't working at all, try turning up your range. Like for example, if I make my range really small, like 50, it's not actually going to trigger. And the reason for that is because it can't get close enough to my main character. It would have to be like on top of my main character for that range to be 50. So if yours isn't working, try turning the range up. Try turning it down if you think it's happening too far away. And you can kind of dial in a number that you think is a good appropriate distance for the action to happen. Okay, that's great. Now the last thing I want to do for this is I'm going to make it spawn a hitbox. We've used hitboxes before once. When we were doing this stuff for our character's attack, we had it so that when our main character is attacking, it spawns an attack box, right? And the attack box is typically invisible. It only lasts a second, but it kind of shows where the attack is actually happening, so that Construct can check to see if the damage is hitting the enemy or not. We're going to do the same idea, but we're going to use the enemy to make a hitbox to damage our player. So to start with, I'm going to make an actual sprite that represents the enemy's attack. I'm going to right-click anywhere in the empty space on Layout. I'm going to click on Insert New Object. I'm going to click just one time on Sprite. Don't double click, just click it once, and that way you have the opportunity to name it before we create it. Now I'm going to call it Enemy 1 Attack. You could call it Enemy 1 Attack, you could call it Enemy 1 Hitbox, whatever you're going to recognize. Now I won't let you do spaces here. It has to be all one word, so you have to kind of smush all the words together. But once you have the name, click Insert. And then click anywhere in the white space, and it brings up the animations editor. Now, because nobody's actually going to see this hitbox, we can keep it very simple. We can just take a color with a paint bucket and fill it in. I'm going to make a pink box. The color doesn't matter because ultimately we're going to make this thing invisible. So fill it with a color, go ahead and close it. There's a big pink box. Now by default, that's pretty big. We can adjust the size of it, right? We're going to make a size that seems reasonable. We can always adjust this later on too. I'm going to start with one that's maybe this big. I think that's about the size of his little pincers, right? Cool. Now, ultimately, we don't want this to be on the screen. So if we drag it out of the boundaries, if I drag it up into the gray area, it'll just be hanging out up here. That way it won't kind of, interfere with anything that's happening in our actual game. So I recommend whenever you have something like this, like I think we've done it before with our projectile and our other hitbox, we can just drag it up there and get rid of it. Now let's go to our event sheet. What we're going to do is we're going to have an event that tests to see if our enemy's attack animation is playing. And if it is, it's going to spawn attack hitboxes. So let's go to enemy 1. We're going to do is playing. And we're going to start by typing in a quotation mark, attack. Click done. We're going to say that when the attack is playing, let's add an action, enemy 1, and we're going to spawn another object. Spawn another object. The object's going to be the enemy 1 attack. Good. Go ahead and click done, and let's try it out. Cool. Now it works, but it's not great, right? It's not great for a couple reasons. One is that the attack box is way over here, not where the attack is happening. I want the enemy to spawn the attack hitbox like right here, right? Where the jaws are. The other thing is the attack hitbox just stays there. So you're just going to keep leaving behind attack boxes, which is also not great. So let's see if we can adjust those. The other thing, and it's a little bit more subtle, is that notice how the attack hitbox is spawned right away, where I feel like the attack hitbox shouldn't happen until my enemy's jaws are actually closing, right? So we can adjust that too. Let's start by making the hitbox spawn at a specific image point on our enemy. And this is stuff that we've done before, but let's take a look at it again. I'm going to go to my layout. I'm going to double click on my enemy. Now let's go to our attack animation. What we're going to do is we're going to use image points to decide where the attack hitbox spawns. So click on the tool, looks like a little crosshair, and right click over here on the left panel to add a new image point. We're going to call this image point attack. Now I recommend right clicking on this and applying it to the whole animation. That way it's there for all the different frames. Otherwise you have to go in frame by frame and keep adding it. So right click, apply the whole animation, and then it'll be there for all the different frames. What we want to do is we want to adjust where the attack hitbox comes out. This little red square is the image point. So for mine, I feel like it doesn't really matter where it is for 1, 2, 3, and 4, but on frame 5, that's when I want the hitbox to be right here, right at the point of contact, right? Right where its mandibles are closing around my character's feet. So just click to move it where you want it. If you have multiple frames where you want it in different locations, you can change it for each frame. That's good. Now let's try it out. Nothing yet. It's still just making it in the middle here. Now the reason for that is over here in the event sheet. If I go to where it says enemy spawn, enemy 1 attack box, if I double click on that, I have to set the image point. By default, the image point is just 0, which is just the middle of your character. But I can change that to be the attack image point that we just created. Now we named it attack, so I can type in attack here, but I have to use quotation marks around the name. Now again, we're using the name attack here because that's what we named the image point that we just made in the attack animation, all right? But with that set, it should work. Let's test it out. Good. Now, I actually don't really like that it's making hitboxes over here during the first frames of the attack animation. I want it to really just spawn a hitbox when it hits right here. I don't want it to do damage to my main character when it's just preparing for the attack. So what I can do is I can make it only spawn the hitbox on a particular frame. If I go and look at my animation, the frame that I want the attack to actually happen on is frame 5, right? Frame 5 down here. Now notice how it starts on 0. The first frame is actually frame 0, which is a little confusing. So you have to look at the numbers here. Frame 5 is where the attack should take place. So what I can do in my event sheet is I can double click on my event that has the is animation attack playing. I can go to my enemy and I can hit on compare frame. Compare frame lets you put what frame you want this to happen on. And it's the frame in the animation. So mine is frame 5. Yours is going to be a different number. You might not even have to worry about this. Your enemy's attack animation might be attacking the whole time. And if it is, don't even worry about this. But if your enemy's attack happens at a very specific point in the animation, you can set the frame to whatever you want by using the compare frame option. Good. Now if I test that, we should see it's perfect. Only makes the attack hitbox right there on frame 5. Cool. Now there's a couple other small things I want to do. I want to make it so that this attack box doesn't stay, right? After just like a split second, the attack hitbox should disappear. So let's add a new event for the enemy 1 attack. And I'm going to go down to on created, which means that as soon as this box is created, we can add an action. I'm going to go to system for this one. And down at the bottom of system, you'll find wait. Wait means that it'll wait a certain amount of time and then do the next action for your event. We're going to set this number to a really low number. I'm going to set this to 0.1 seconds. So just a fraction of a second, and click done. Now we're going to add an action. So after it waits 0.1 seconds, go to our attack hitbox, scroll down, destroy. Now let's try that. Good. The attack hitbox only lasts for a fraction of a second, and then it disappears. Excellent. Now the last small thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so the attack hitbox is invisible. Ultimately, we don't want the player to see the hitboxes, right? We want to be able to see them when we're testing them, but that's not something that we want to have stay in the game visible for the players. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one last action. I'm going to go to the enemy attack. See here what says set visible? Change that to invisible. Now here, it's saying that after 0.1 seconds, destroy it and then set it invisible. We want to make it invisible right at the beginning, right? As soon as it's created. So let's drag the set visibility invisible up to the top, above the wait, because anything below the wait is going to take place after a fraction of a second. We want this to happen before it. Now let's try it. If this works, we shouldn't see anything. Good. You can always go back and check. If you turn this to visible by double clicking on it, you can always kind of troubleshoot and make sure it's working, and then turn it back to invisible. Now we don't have a system in place yet to damage the player, right? The attack hitbox hits our player, but nothing really happens. We'll cover that in a future video. We'll make a whole system that damages our enemies, that damages our player's life and triggers a hurt animation for our main character. But we'll do that at a future date. Now, before we wrap it up, I recommend organizing the stuff that we've made so far, right? We have subgroups within the enemy group for movement and damage. Let's do one more subgroup under here. If I right-click where it says enemy 1, I can click on add, and I can add a subgroup. I'm going to call this enemy 1 attack. What I can do is I can take all the stuff that I made, these 3 or 4 different events, and drag them up to where it says add event to enemy 1 attack. Now to move them, you have to drag them from the left side. Don't drag them from here, it doesn't work. You have to drag it from over here on the left. Drop it right where it says add event to enemy 1 attack. Cool. That keeps it really organized. Now we have different event groups or different subgroups for each part of our enemies code. We'll leave it at that for now. Thanks for joining me. Bye.